this video is over providing student feedback, and my name is Janice Myers. First, we're going to go over how to provide student feedback. Step 1 will be to actually look at the standard and the scale so that you know what to look for whenever you're looking at the student's work. You need to know what a level 3 is and what a level 2 is in order to evaluate their work. Step 2 is to actually look at the student's work and first decide if the student is a level 2. You want to establish that level 2 material first, then deciding if they are a level 3. Finally, you're going to identify errors and describe to the student what they must do to reach the next level. Before we look at any student examples, we need to follow our step 1 and go ahead and take a look at the standard and at the scale. So the standard we're looking at is Standard 16, the Pythagorean theorem. The learning objective is that the student will use the Pythagorean theorem to find missing sides of right triangles. The scale says that a level 3 student can use the Pythagorean theorem with little to no omissions or errors. A level 2 student will recognize and is able to set up the Pythagorean theorem, but they may not be able to actually go through and solve the equation for the missing side. So the example problem that our students completed stated, a man leans a ladder against a wall. The ladder reaches 12 feet up the side of the wall, and the base of the ladder is 5 feet away from the base of the wall. Draw a picture, and how long is the ladder? Here's what student A completed. They drew a picture showing that the ladder is 12 feet up the wall, so that's correct, and that it's 5 feet from the base of the wall. Then they had to use the Pythagorean theorem to find the length of that ladder. So they were able to correctly write the Pythagorean theorem for the problem, but they did not get the correct answer. Their error isn't in whether or not they know the Pythagorean theorem. Their error is in evaluating the numbers. So they said 12 squared was 24 instead of saying that it was 144. They're multiplying by 2 instead of squaring it. They did the same thing here for 5 squared equals to x squared. They correctly added the numbers together even though they weren't the correct numbers. And they did know that they needed to take the square root of both sides in order to get their answer. So this student is a level 2 because they were able to correctly set up the problem, recognize that it was a Pythagorean theorem problem, and correctly set up the Pythagorean theorem equation. Their error was a mathematical error that they evaluated their numbers incorrectly. So this student isn't a 3 because this is a pretty big error for the Pythagorean theorem as far as mathematically, but they also are higher than a 2. So this student would be a 2.5 because they made the error of squaring their numbers. Student B. Student B set up their problem correctly, that it's 12 feet up the wall and 5 feet away from the base. They set up their problem correctly down here. And they did recognize that they needed to use the Pythagorean theorem, but they wrote the equation incorrectly. The hypotenuse is right here, the x value, but they said that their hypotenuse was 12. So even though this student correctly squared the numbers and solved the equation, since the equation was wrong, they did the Pythagorean theorem wrong, the student would not be a level 2. So the feedback that you would provide to this student is that they need to practice identifying their hypotenuse first. So the hypotenuse is always across in that right angle. So if they knew what correct side was the hypotenuse, then they could correctly plug that into their equation for the hypotenuse, and they already got the rest of it down. So that's what this student would need to do to not only earn a level 2, but to move on to earn a level 3, to be proficient. Here's our last student. They correctly labeled their picture, that the ladder's 5 feet away from the base and 12 feet up the wall. They set up their triangle down here correctly. They plugged everything correctly into their Pythagorean theorem, evaluated correctly, and solved correctly. So this student did get the correct answer, and they are level 3. So my feedback to them would be to point out that they're setting up the equation correctly, that they're evaluating their numbers correctly and solving correctly. But the only way to move on from here would be to be able to apply the Pythagorean theorems to other problems in the future. That's what they would need to do to earn a level 4 or the advanced level. So just as a review, student A, our feedback would be that they're setting everything up correctly, they just need practice evaluating their numbers. So that could be as simple as using a calculator or going over how to square numbers. Student B needs help with identifying the hypotenuse and then plugging that correctly into the equation. And student C's feedback would be that they are doing everything correctly. The only way to move forward from here would be to apply the Pythagorean theorem to other problems. And that's it for the video.